One of the biggest traps that I've noticed in the psychedelic community and spirituality in general is this concept of killing your ego, or trying to destroy your ego. Like it's this selfish, primal beast that must be put away with, that it's the source of all your problems, all your selfishness, your attachments. And there is some truth to this. When you're too narrow in your perspective and you're too attached to physical reality and you only think about yourself like you're the center of the universe, yeah, of course, this can lead to many problems in life, destroy relationships, not get you what you really want because you're operating from this narcissistic point of reality where you're too self-absorbed. But there is also a great ironic danger with trying to destroy your ego, because the ego is the mind's lens of perceiving reality. And you have all these different interpretations of what it is. You've got Freud's superego and ego and all that. But for simplicity's sake, even if you go back on the etymology of what ego means, it means I. There are different layers of what you is. But the ego, for simplicity's sake, is your mind's lens of perceiving reality. It's a single point of consciousness. The ego in and of itself isn't a problem. It's when you overly attach to the ego. It's when you get stuck inside this little box of reality and like, this must be this and I must be this, and you crystallize into this pattern where you become a slave to your own mind. That's egotism. Or of course you can talk about inflated ego, hubris, when you can't think outside yourself, when you struggle to empathize with others, when you can't admit that you're wrong. We've all gone through this, especially when you're young, and maybe this has to do with having an underdeveloped brain, which actually takes until your mid-20s for your prefrontal cortex to fully form. Now, the biggest problem with killing the ego is the fact that it's impossible to do so. The only way that you can actually, for good, kill your ego is through physical death. Because no matter how many ego death experiences you go through where you merge with consciousness and you shred your ego to a billion atoms that spread through the universe, you're still going to come back. You might even destroy your old identity and form a completely new one. But does that old identity truly die? I've noticed that throughout my life, I have been very resistant to my own nature. A lot of aspects of my personality that I do not like. Most of your personality is formed from the ages of 0 to 7. And for the most part, you can't change your nature. This doesn't mean that you can't change your behavior or improve yourself, but there's whatever makes you you, considering your genetic makeup, where you were born, the parents that you grew up with, the country that you were born in, the time period that you were born in, the friends that you hung out with, who your family are, the books that you read, all this kind of stuff, it all feeds into your ego and who you are. Now, I've gone through this before, where I tried to kill my ego. I called it ego death and all that kind of stuff. And, in this book, you might have heard of it, The Psychedelic Experience, they talk about how a much more appropriate term is ego liberation instead of ego loss, because you can't lose your ego. It's always going to be there. What's the saying? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. This is absolutely true when it comes to the ego. You can try to kill it all you want, but in the end, it's always going to come back. And it's going to come back stronger. You're going to have ego backlash, especially because you're using this active force, this pendulum swing to... And the harder you push, the more it's going to push back. The more it's going to build its callus and get stronger. And it's going to be able to weave through all your spiritual practices, through psychedelics and meditation, all the stuff that makes you think that kills your ego. It's going to interweave with all of that. It's going to use spirituality and merge with it. Like spiritual materialism, right? It uses spirituality and all these practices and beliefs and identities as a costume to make itself feel better. So it's always there. And I know that you know what I'm talking about. You've seen this before. Maybe it's even happened to you at some point. Definitely to me. We're not invulnerable to this. I've noticed that once I let go of this idea of trying to kill my ego and instead try to harmonize with it, because it can be your best friend or your worst enemy, but you can't kill it. It's always there, so you might as well learn to live with it. It's reconciling. It's not being egoic. It's holding hands with your ego, harmonizing with it, seeing beyond this narrow lens of perception, broadening your perspective, but also understanding that you're still a human being living in physical space. You still have human nature. This is why reading Robert Greene's work has been a great help, because he gives you a brutal but true take on human nature. You can get the most spiritual person in the world, but if you change his environment in a way, you could turn him into an animal. And we have that within us, that killer instincts, that survival mechanism, that selfish gene, as Richard Dawkins put it. And this is okay. The more you resist all these ugly aspects of nature, the more it's going to push back. The uglier it's going to become. And do you know why? It's because it's going to hide. It's going to merge into these hidden, repressed parts of your unconscious, and it's going to come out in ways that you're not aware of. So it's better to accept these uglier shadow components of the human psyche and learn to harmonize with it. Learn to transmute it. If you go into the psychedelic experience, especially when you have a really intense one, where your ego gets shred apart and you have a not very solid foundation, it's easy to become deluded. I remember this guy, man, he got really deep into psychedelics, and then he believed that he was like a prophet, and the psychedelics was telling him an important message where he had to share it with the world, and then created this good and evil narrative in his mind of certain people talking about psychedelics. You're evil and I'm good. I'm starting to do good for the world and all that kind of stuff. Like this becomes all egotism. You always have to question yourself when you're trying to save the world. Like, is it coming from a genuine place? Do you ever have that part of yourself that goes, I wonder if this is coming from a genuine place. Is my emotions just deceiving me? Is there a darker, ulterior motive here? Is there this unprocessed, repressed emotion that I haven't dealt with, and is trying to overcompensate by trying to be overly good and spiritual? I'm not saying this is always the case. Sometimes it really is genuine. Maybe that there are truly enlightened beings that are pure love and light. But even then, man, look at the Bible and all the prophets. They all had their dark issues too. And that's okay. That's humanity. It's humanity. I remember going to India and seeing this guru, and people were like kissing his feet. And, you're so holy, you're so pure. And, he would play the part. He, wore the orange robe, and at the time I loved him. He was awesome. But I could also see that spiritual ego peek out. He never questioned himself. He just assumed that, yep, God is guiding me through this whole thing, and I'm on the right path, and everything that I do is good and pure. Fast forward a couple years later, a scandal came out where he ended up being this sexual predator. And this is just one example of someone that I personally knew. Imagine all the other ones. Now, I'm not trying to make this all dark and be like, yes, I got fucked up shit too. I can be selfish. I can be egotistical. I can think I'm smarter than I am. Sometimes the pendulum swings the other way. And I've also had the effect of losing my confidence, being so insecure that I didn't believe in myself anymore. There can be this point of going too far, which is trying to shred your ego, because it just depends on the season and stage you are in life. Because I feel like at the beginning, and maybe this is why human beings work the way they do through human evolution and the brain taking a long time to form. Maybe when you're young, you're supposed to be more egotistical. Maybe you're supposed to develop your ego, buy into this self-delusion, so that way you can ignore all the other realities, so you can just do your thing. Sometimes that's useful. It's like how many musicians and rappers who think, I'm going to be the greatest rapper in the world. Like, yeah, okay, most of them are completely delusional, but some of them actually do end up becoming the best rapper of all time because they bought into that delusion, because they built their ego. Maybe that's an important stage of human development where you're supposed to build up your ego. Up to a certain stage, of course, because then it becomes much more unattractive the older you get. The point I'm trying to make here is reconciling with the ego. Sometimes it's okay to harden your identity and make it stronger. And then sometimes, let it go, transcend. You don't always want to be in that place where you're constantly trying to deconstruct your ego and dissolve your boundaries. Sometimes we need boundaries. Try growing a plant without putting it in a pot, which is boundaries. All this other stuff is going to come in. Sometimes we need a space, a garden. Pull out the weeds and grow the plants that we want. have a healthy mind, have a good foundation. I'm not against having an ego death experience. I just think the word can be dangerous, because saying, yes, I killed my ego, yes, my ego died, not only is it inaccurate, but this can lead into delusional thinking, because the ego never dies. the ego is always going to beat you. From experience, those who think that they've killed their ego always have the biggest egos. Straight up. Whereas those I've met who accept fully their human ego, fully accept their flaws and the dark side of their nature, usually the most humble and the most kind. The shadow can come out in very sneaky ways. Anyways, I guess I'm just rambling at this point. But don't try to kill your ego, mate. The ego's your friend. It can be your friend if you allow it to be. Just don't let it be the be-all, end-all master of your reality. Because both extremes are bad. Trying to disown it, but also making it the center of your universe. It's like, just harmonize with it, but also realize there's a world much beyond yours.